The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Well, let me just. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish earned a massive win over the Indiana Hoosiers at home, 27-17, this past Friday night, that being December 20th. It was a night game in South Bend. It was the biggest game in my mind of Marcus Freeman's career at Notre Dame. And you know what? They dominated Indiana. In reality, the score was not even that close. It was not 27-17. It was 27-3. The fact that a reporter after the game asked not Mike Denbrock, although Mike Denbrock certainly didn't need to expose much of his scheme either, asked Al Golden, were you concerned that Indiana was moving up and down the field late in the game? And Gold's like, no. And I imagine his brain, he's like, are you kidding me? There was no way that Indiana was going to come back and tie the game without special teams gaffes. And that's not my job. That's the job of the special teams coordinator for Notre Dame. They owned Indiana, owned them, and they won their first major postseason game of the 21st century. And they're going to be playing the best head coach in college football, in Kirby Smart, and college football's current #1 program in Georgia, who's favored by 1.5 points. But Notre Dame actually opened up this game as the favorite. They opened up as about a 1.5 point favorite against the Georgia Bulldogs. And this game will be taking place at 8:45 p.m., and that will be New Year's Day, January 1st, 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 7:45 p.m. local time in the Central Time Zone. Notre Dame's given a 53.9% chance to win this game, and actually the line's even moved up to Georgia -2. So I think a lot of people right now are kind of looking at Georgia here and thinking that the Bulldogs are going to win. But we're going to talk about the Sugar Bowl here, the fourth and final College Football Playoff Quarterfinal. And before I preview this game, give you my prediction and analysis, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button, to like the video, to click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new content on College Football with Sam. We'll be live for this game to do play-by-play, color commentary, to interact with you all in the chat. It'll be a really good time. It's really good for the channel, for growth, and also for you as you get to interact with this channel. And also, the notification bell will notify you when we go live during the week to react to games, to preview games, to react to breaking news, or to talk about predictions and just fun college football topics. And also when we release videos, like I'm going to do a deep dive for this game, where this video is not even 30 minutes long, just around 20 minutes probably, and the deep dive will be around 40 minutes. So there will be more in-depth analysis, more matchups to talk about, and just kind of a different feel overall. So please do those things. Bless me. And also comment your prediction and your preview for this game down below. Share the video around the channel around to other college football fans who you know will love this content because they love the sport. And make sure to, again, comment your thoughts down below, and also join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. If you want to donate to me to support the work that I do here, you can do via Super Chat in the comment section. You can purchase merchandise via my merchandise store, which the link to that's in the description or the pinned comment. You can get a nice black or white College Football with Sam sweater. There's other items there that you should check out. And also, you can join as a member of my Patreon page if you want to just donate monthly, and that's your type of thing. But I appreciate all that you do, the support that you've provided me on the channel. I love it. Very grateful. Let's talk about this game now, though, and discuss the critical matchup. And there's multiple, but this is matchup A, the one that I'm kind of the most excited for. And there's another that I'll talk about that I'm excited for as well. What will Notre Dame's rushing defense, because Riley Mills is sadly out for this game. He's out for the season, actually. So if Notre Dame wins this game, they'll have to win without him for the rest of the year. And he was their best defensive lineman, potentially their best player up front, and potentially their best player on defense outside of Xavier Watts at safety, alien player. And Mills was close to that, but he's done for the year. And how, in response to that, does Al Golden's defense do on the ground against a Georgia rushing attack that has not been productive all year, but still, the Dogs have an elite offensive line when healthy, and Gunnar Stockton's more mobile than Carson Beck is. So Gunnar Stockton can run the ball on like designed runs or read options, not just gain yards and improvised scrambles like Carson Beck, for example, or Drew Aller if they beat Boise State and Notre Dame beats Georgia, and they'll face another QB kind of like Beck, who doesn't run a whole lot, but when they do, they can pick up yards on improvised scrambles. Stockton's mobile, dual threat guy out of high school. And Georgia also has, they got Trevor Etienne at running back, and they just do a good job, I think, in terms of trench play, in trench dominance, and it's going to be very hard for Notre Dame to do what they did to Indiana against Georgia. In fact, I don't think Notre Dame will necessarily be expecting themselves to do what they did against Indiana against the Georgia Bulldogs, who've prided themselves amongst winning in the trenches, not necessarily winning with finesse or even great QB play. Sometimes they win with just good or average QB play. So that's the fascinating matchup right there. You look at Notre Dame and their rushing defense. They're allowing this season, they're allowing a total of 3.7 yards per carry, 133 rushing yards per game. They're outside the top 25 there. Georgia, in terms of rushing offense, they are 82nd in yards per game, averaging 4, and 96th in rushing yards per game, averaging 126.3. They don't run the football that much either, so maybe if they ran it more, they'd be more successful, but not good numbers for Georgia across the whole year. The other critical matchup is Notre Dame's offense, but I am going to say specifically their rushing offense, a little bit of their passing offense maybe as well, but more so like short passing offense, if that's included. Notre Dame's short game, their short passing offense, their long rushing offense, what they're good at. What Notre Dame is good at on offense against a Georgia defense, specifically rushing defense, but also overall, that is lethal, that's well coached by Kirby Smart and by Glenn Schumann. Notre Dame is averaging over 6 yards per carry on the ground this season with Jeremiyah Love, who is an alien at running back, and he wasn't healthy against Indiana. He had the flu and also got dinged up during the game. Jadarian Price is an elite running back. This Georgia defense, they're allowing 3.8 yards per carry, which is 32nd, and 129.3 rushing yards per game, which is 32nd. But they've played Tennessee, they've played Alabama, they've played Kentucky, they've played Clemson, they have played Ole Miss, they have played Georgia Tech, and I'm trying to think of any other opponents that Texas. They played Texas twice, in fact. So that right there, I have 8 opponents that I'm discussing with you right now, and there's potentially more who either run the football a lot or they're pretty good at running the football. A case in point, Alabama early in the year, elite rushing offense. Georgia Tech with Haynes King healthy, elite rushing offense. Texas does not have an elite rushing offense. It's just an all-right one, but their O-line's really good, and Georgia has pummeled their O-line in both of their matchups. So that's what I'm fascinated with, is this Georgia defense that is, in terms of talent, unlike anything that Notre Dame has seen all season long, and Notre Dame's offense, which in terms of rushing is more successful and more threatening than anything that the Dogs have seen all season long. Let's check out these offenses here. I think that Notre Dame's offense is the better of these two units. I truly believe that. I think that's, in fact, fairly obvious. I mean, you look at analytics, and that's true, but sometimes the analytics can be a little bit deceiving with, strength of schedule kept in mind. Notre Dame is scoring 38.8 points per game compared to Georgia's 31.9. They're averaging 0.602 points per play, first, compared to Georgia's 0.456 points per play, which is 33rd. Notre Dame scores 4.8 offensive touchdowns per game, which is 3rd. Georgia only scores 3.8. Notre Dame is actually less effective in the red zone than Georgia is. Georgia is a top 15 red zone scoring percentage offense. They're also top 10 in red zone scoring attempts per game and red zone scores per game. Notre Dame's outside the top 40 in all those, but that's because they get a lot of explosive plays, a lot of explosive runs in particular. And again, the 6.2 yards per carry compared to Georgia's 4 yards per carry. Notre Dame, in terms of in terms of pass protection is pretty equal to Georgia, which, if you're a Notre Dame fan, should probably be a little bit concerning because Georgia's played a much tougher schedule, much tougher defenses than Notre Dame has. But I still think that, tackle for Notre Dame, and then quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, now that Mitchell Evans is healthy, I think those things slightly favor Notre Dame. If Beck was healthy, I would be very tempted to put Beck ahead of Leonard. At least I would have that as another push area, which I think is what center and guard are for these teams. Notre Dame definitely has the better offense. It's not by a wide margin, but it's definitive. I like Bo Collins, Jordan Faison, and Jaden Greathouse over Arian Smith, Dylan Bell, and Dominic Lovett. Georgia, in a lot of these rooms, actually has more potential than Notre Dame does, but Notre Dame is simply playing at a higher level so often in these games that I think I have to give them credit for how they're playing, not just their potential. You look at the offensive line: Ernest Green III, Dylan Fairchild, Jarrett Wilson, Tate Ratledge, and Xavier Truss for Georgia. That's an awesome offensive line. And at center and at guard, if you had to force my hand one way or another, right now, since Georgia is healthier there, I would lean Georgia at both center and guard. I think for Notre Dame, Anthony Knapp, Sam Pendleton, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and Emil Wagner are also elite, though, and I think their tackle room right now is better than Georgia's. Notre Dame is one of the best rushing offenses in terms of off-tackle rushing in the country, if not the best, more likely than not. Their tackles and also tight ends, Mitchell Evans and not Holden Stays, Cooper Flanagan. Holden Stays transferred to Tennessee after spending last year with the Irish. They do a very good job. I would favor tight end for Notre Dame, but I think that Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, and Ben Urasek are very good as well. In fact, I'd say a deeper room. I just think that Mitchell Evans by himself is the best tight end. At quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, good player. I think he's actually pretty similar to Leonard in a lot of ways. Limited throwing capability, great on the ground, and overall does make more good decisions than bad from what I've seen. But Leonard has the experience, so I give him the edge there. Running back, it's not even close. Jeremiyah Love and Jadarian Price are obviously better than Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier. Georgia's offense, though, is not to be trifled with because they start off games slow. Their scripted drives, in my mind, are just kind of mind-numbing with what Mike Bobo wants to do. But then after the scripted drive, something interesting happens. In first quarter points per game, Georgia is 115th nationally. They score 3.4. In second quarter points per game, they only score 8.3, which is 61st. They're a lot like Penn State offensively in terms of how long they take to get heated up, except they take even longer. But then in the third quarter, Georgia scores 8 points per game, which is 21st. And in the fourth quarter, they score 10.3 points per game, which is 9th. Georgia has been in a lot of come-from-behind situations or situations where they need to close out games late, and they do it. Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, every single time, with the exception of Ole Miss, this offense has come alive. The game goes on, and they begin to outpace and dominate their opponents the longer the game goes on. I think a lot of that has to do with talent more than scheme, honestly, just based off of how the offense starts out slow every game, and you'd think that eventually with good schematics, they'd be able to do something to start off a game fast. But their talent, and also I think good enough coaching offensively, helps them to really wear down teams late. So that's something to keep in mind here. Defensively, I like Notre Dame at DB, both at safety and corner. Linebacker is a push. I don't know who I'd go with here at linebacker. I think that you look at Jack Kiser, you look at Drayk Bowen, you also look at Jaylen Sneed. That's a really good linebacker room. C.J. Allen and Smile Munden Jr., Jalen Walker, they're of similar caliber, so I don't know where to go there. I will say, though, that while Dalen Everett, K.J. Bolden, Malachi Starks, Julian Humphrey, and Jonel Aguero, Georgia's secondary is inferior to Christian Gray, Xavier Watts, Adon Schuler, Leonard Moore, and Jordan Clark, Notre Dame's DBs, I do think that without Riley Mills, you got Joshua Burnham, Gabriel Rubio or Donovan Hinish, Howard Cross III, and R.J. Oben Compare that to Michael Williams, Nazir Stackhouse, Christian Miller, Warren Brinson, Chaz Chambliss II, or not the second, and Damon Wilson II. Georgia's deeper, and they have a higher ceiling on the defensive line. And I'd say with Mills being out, their D-line is way better than Notre Dame's right now. I mean, their D-line has dominated Texas's offensive line in the same way that Notre Dame's dominated Indiana's. And Texas has a better offensive line than Indiana does. So, things to keep in mind there. When you look at the analytics, Notre Dame is much better defensively. They're third in opponent points per game, only allowing 13.8. Georgia allows 21.8. Georgia allows 0.313 points per play, which is 26th. Notre Dame allows 0.205 points per play, which is 4th. So, analytically, Notre Dame's the better team here. And I think that's why a lot of power ratings actually have Notre Dame favored in this game, is because analytically, Notre Dame is not just better, they're significantly better. At the line of scrimmage, I would have to lean Georgia, though. It's slight, it's not by a whole lot, but it is an advantage. I think they have the way better D-line. I think Notre Dame overall has an equal offensive line to Georgia. Better on the outside, or Notre Dame's better on the outside. Georgia's a little bit better on the inside. I think the line of scrimmage goes to Georgia. Special teams goes to Georgia. And Georgia has the more talented roster via the blue chip ratio. In terms of watching these two teams play, though, I think their rosters are pretty equal. And a lot of this is the fact that Georgia's been battered, banged up. They're without their starting quarterback, Carson Beck. They're without some players overall at other positions. Notre Dame is too. But the Irish do have the better offense. And their defense could be better as well. And I think that Freeman has done a good job in terms of development and recruiting as well, but also development, both of those, in shrinking the talent gap that Notre Dame has traditionally had in comparison to the top Big Ten or the top SEC teams. I think he's done a much better job than Brian Kelly in terms of roster management and in terms of Notre Dame's direction as a program when it comes to competing for championships. You can have the debate as to whether or not Brian Kelly would have lost to NIU or Marshall. He probably wouldn't have. And maybe I think there's truth, not just maybe, but there is some truth to the fact that Freeman is still very questionable in game management. But he's built an elite staff. His staffs have gotten better every year he's been there. His rosters have gotten better every year he's been there. They're well conditioned. I think he's functioning as a very effective, brilliant CEO right now. Going back to the power ratings, FPI thinks that Notre Dame should win this game by about 3.2 points. S&P Plus is favoring Georgia to win by a half a point. My potential power index is favoring Notre Dame to win by 2.2 points. So I'm someone who for much of the year has not been very high on Notre Dame. My power ratings after the game against Indiana, who I was previously very high on, along with my power ratings, is much higher in Notre Dame right now. Specifically, higher on their defensive staff and higher on their secondary as well, which had a very, very impressive showing against Curtis Rourke. In terms of dominance, Notre Dame has a points per play margin of 0.397. That is first nationally. That means for every one play they run compared to every one play their opponent runs, their average opponent runs, they score 0.397 more points. That's insanely dominant. That means on a game-per-game basis, play-per-play basis, they blow out their opponents. And their EPA margin is 0.229, which also means they drive the football well in terms of yards, in terms of plays, and they do a good job of preventing their opponents from driving effectively. For Georgia, given their number one strength of schedule, a points per play margin of 0.143 is pretty impressive. Very impressive. I still don't think Georgia's the most dominant team in the country, even factoring in strength of schedule, but they're up there. They're close. They've just played a strength of schedule that they've never faced before under Smart, that most teams in college football can't say they faced. And their EPA margin suggests that because it's a 0.214. That's a very impressive expected points added margin. What kills some of Georgia's dominance has been Carson Beck's turnovers in September and October. The fact that they start off very shaky in games on offense. And also since they play a lot of good opponents, when they don't get going, like against Ole Miss, things snowball and they get out of control very quickly. And also when you play more good opponents, as College Football Nerds, wonderful channel points out, you're more likely to fall suspect to worse teams, or you're more likely to have a snoozer game, or to, of course, obviously play in closer contests. I think that the strength of schedules here have to be taken into account. Notre Dame finally broke into the top 50 after playing IU in strength of schedule, but they're 40th. Georgia has the best strength of schedule. And while Notre Dame is ranked higher in FPI, third to Georgia's 5th, and they're higher in game control, third to Georgia's 10th, can the computers really fully factor in the difference between the first strength of schedule and the 40th? Because Notre Dame's and IU's were different strength of schedules, but they weren't 40 placements different, and they weren't playing multiple top 10 power-rated SEC teams versus the best team being Texas A&M or USC different. And now you included Indiana, of course, but again, the strength of schedules here are different. And I think that's something that is telling and something that we have to factor in. And maybe I'm overcompensating on that point because I have this year at times ignored strength of schedule and it's really bit me in the butt. But I think that especially, bless me there, with a Kirby Smart team, we have to take that into consideration. Now, Notre Dame's been really good. I think they're well coached. And I think that they actually have the much better offensive staff than Georgia does. Way better. Denbrock is either the best OC in the country or a top 4 one. And the only ones who I say right now I'd lean towards being ahead of him are Kotelnicki at Penn State and Will Stein at Oregon. And there's an argument for him to be ahead of those two and the best in the country. And Joe Rudolph, his O-line coach, elite. Their running backs coach, awesome. And their defensive staff is good too, but I think Georgia's is just a step ahead. It's the same thing with strength and conditioning. Notre Dame's is top 10 there for sure, but Georgia's is number 1, I think. At head coach is where I really draw the line here. The only coaches who I would say right now are on Smart's level, no one is, but the only ones who are close are Dan Lanning, maybe Ryan Day, maybe Kalen DeBoer, maybe Jonathan Smith. I would have said Curt Cignetti before the Notre Dame game, but I'm going to give it a little bit more time before I say that, even though I think he's top 10. Freeman, I think, is a top 20, top 15 head coach right now. Not quite top 10. If he wins this game, I will probably view him as a top 10 coach, if not like 1 or 2 places behind that. But I do think that Smart is a much better game manager than Freeman is, not just because of some of my questions about Freeman's game management, but it's mostly because Smart's won 2 national titles, and I don't think anyone is really close to him in game management. I mean, think about Rhett Lashley or James Franklin or Josh Heupel, who I have Josh Heupel behind Marcus Freeman, for example. I think that Tennessee would be in a better position with Marcus Freeman as their head coach than Josh Heupel. Those guys are, from a game management perspective, they pale in comparison to Kirby Smart. Curt Cignetti does. Jonathan Smith does. Chris Kleiman. Lance Leipold, who I think is an awesome game manager, pales in comparison. Luke Fickell. Mike Elko. Lane Kiffin. Eli Drinkwitz. I mean, you can list all the coaches in the country. I think Smart's the best game manager out of all of them. And also, he does the best job preparing his team to win. So taking all of that into account, I'm picking Notre Dame to play Georgia competitively. I think they can win. But at the end of the day, I got to trust Kirby Smart here. I've doubted him too much this year. Doubted him both times against Texas. I correctly picked against him with Alabama. And what scares me here is Notre Dame, I think, has some similarities to that Alabama team, where they're fast on defense. They're not perfect on defense. I think Ohio State has a much better defense than Notre Dame does. I think that Penn State's defense might be better, if not for... Analytically, I think it would be better if not for the fact that they've played like Ohio State and Oregon, and Notre Dame hasn't played a team of that caliber yet, especially offensively, and they won't offensively until potentially the national championship game if they, win these next few games. The point I'm trying to make is Georgia's the better staff. They have the trench advantage. This is going to be a neutral site game, but a longer travel for Notre Dame than Georgia. And also Georgia rested. And for a team like Georgia who's been banged up and battered, that extra rest is going to matter exponentially more for Georgia than other teams who've had the bye. Meanwhile, Notre Dame lost Riley Mills, so they'll have some areas that are shaky, and they have not played a defense this good all season long in terms of talent. I say in terms of talent because I think Indiana's defense is really, really good. And in fact, I think Indiana might have the better rushing defense than Georgia does. But I think that talent matters a lot here. And I think that Georgia is coached better than IU on defense. They have more talent. With an additional week, they can play closer to that talent ceiling. And there's also the standpoint that Georgia, because of the talent they have on offense, I don't think they'll struggle in the same way that IU did, because they don't have that same trench deficit. And while Indiana, see, this is the issue with Indiana. Indiana's much more efficient than Georgia is. Much more efficient. They do a much better job punching above their weight class and maximizing what they have compared to Georgia. But Georgia has so much more talent, and they have a better head coach, to where that negates some of the efficiency issues that Georgia has had. And Indiana can't do that because you have Elijah Surratt, you have Omar Cooper Jr., you have Curtis Rourke, and they've been very efficient. But at some point, they're going to play athletes who are faster and bigger than they are. And they folded. Because at that point, it's the whole thing about how Indiana's been going around people all season, or it's sometimes through people. But Indiana, they don't have the talent to go around people. They have to go through people all the time. And at some point, Notre Dame had so much talent to where there was no hope in Indiana to punch above their weight class and beat Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just overwhelmed them. That's not going to be the case here. Even if Indiana may be more efficient at points, or even maybe better, dare I say, at some points than Georgia, Georgia's roster all around, their ceiling's way higher. They're faster. They're stronger. They have a twitch in them that Indiana doesn't have. And I think that they're going to bring that in this game. Notre Dame, though, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you should expect to win because Georgia doesn't have their starting QB. They're very questionable on offense as is, even without some of their issues. And I think that Georgia's defense can be got in some areas. My model actually is picking Notre Dame to win 2.2 points, but I do think here that the Dogs come out on top. So go Bulldogs, go Irish. I hope that this is a phenomenal Sugar Bowl. I think it'll be a very close game and a very entertaining game from a standpoint of competition, like the Rose Bowl. I think it'll be very low scoring, though. So that's why I have Georgia winning 16-14. I think they're going to kick a lot of field goals, maybe force a turnover from Riley Leonard. I think that Georgia will do a good job of flipping the field. They have a much better punter and kicker than what Notre Dame has. So I think they'll win the field position battle quite a bit. And I expect, actually, for Notre Dame to probably outgain Georgia in yards, but for Georgia to just do the little things better, and that will result in a close Georgia win. They'll move on to play the winner of Penn State, Boise State in the Orange Bowl. So go Bulldogs and go Irish. Hope that the teams play well and that it's an entertaining game. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Carlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.